Catat nih, orang yang cuman mental bilang bubarin DPR, itulah orang tolol sedunia.
Imagine you're just on the street and you see a police vehicle just crush a young man's life right in front of your eyes. That was Affan's fate. He was only 21 years old, just delivering food on his motorbike near Parliament. And this Brimob vehicle doesn't just hit him, it runs him over. Then it actually backs up and runs over him again while trying to get away from the crowd. The whole thing was caught on video. Everyone in Indonesia saw it, and everyone lost their minds. So here's where this story gets really messed up. You've got Affan, out there making maybe 100,000 rupiah on a good day, right? Just trying to get by. Meanwhile, the politicians in that building he was delivering food to, they were about to get a 50 million rupiah housing allowance every single month. I'm serious. 50 million rupiah just for housing. You want to know how crazy that number is? Indonesia's official poverty line is about 609,000 rupiah a month. So these guys were getting 80 times the poverty line just to pay rent. Most Indonesians are living on something like 21,000 rupiah a day. These MPs get over 1.6 million rupiah a day just for existing. But it gets worse. Because when people started getting angry about all this MP, Ahmad Sahroni, goes on the record and says, "Those who want to dissolve the DPR are the dumbest people in the world." The dumbest people in the world, not concerned citizens or people struggling. The dumbest people. Dude, read the room. Within hours, there was a mob outside his house. They trashed it. And he wasn't the only one getting hit. Nafa Urbach, another MP, was out there defending her 50 million rupiah allowance because, and I'm quoting here, commuting from Bintaro to Senayan is just so hard. Protesters went after her house too. Except, and this is almost funny if it weren't so tragic, they got the wrong house. Turns out, she was just renting it from this actor, Zach Lee. Can you imagine being that guy? You're just minding your own business and get caught in the middle of this. Then you have Uya Kuya making jokes about being an MP being like an artist. You're contenting. And Eco Patrios posting DJ dance videos while the country's literally on fire. These people just, they don't get it. So Jakarta explodes, and then it spreads everywhere. Makassar, Bandung, Surabaya, everywhere. People weren't just mad about Affan anymore. They wanted these housing allowances gone. They wanted cops to be held accountable. They basically wanted politicians to remember they work for regular people, not the other way around. In Makassar, things got really bad. Someone set the regional parliament building on fire. 3 people died in those flames. 5 more had to jump from the burning building and ended up in the hospital. By the end of it all, 6 people were dead. Almost 1,000 arrested just in Jakarta. And through all of this, there's one chant you keep hearing. Dissolve the DPR. Dissolve the DPR. Which brings me to the really interesting part of this story. What if I told you that dissolving the DPR isn't just hard to do? It's literally impossible. I'm not kidding. It says so right in the Constitution. Article 7C. The president cannot freeze and/or dissolve the DPR. That's it. Case closed. And there's a really good reason for that. Indonesia tried this before, twice, and both times it was a total disaster. 1960, Sukarno gets mad at the DPR for rejecting his budget, so he just dissolves them, replaces the whole thing with his own hand-picked assembly. Spoiler alert, that didn't end well for Indonesian democracy. 2001. Gus Dur tries to suspend parliament and call new elections. The DPR meets that same day and impeaches him. So much for dissolving parliament. It dissolved his presidency instead. So when they wrote the new constitution, they basically said, never again. Article 7C isn't protecting corrupt politicians. It's protecting the whole system from falling apart. But here's what I find fascinating about all this. Maybe these protesters chanting "dissolve the DPR" aren't actually asking for constitutional suicide. Maybe they're asking for something else entirely. How do we fix this broken system? Because let's be real here. When your representatives are getting 50 million rupiah a month and you're scraping by on 20,000 rupiah a day, something's seriously wrong. And that 50 million, that's just for housing. When you add up all their allowances, travel money, and benefits, we're talking over 100 million rupiah per month for some of these people. You could literally lift 150 families out of poverty with what one MP makes in a month. Oh, and here's the kicker. A lot of economists think that 609,000 rupiah poverty line is way too low anyway. They're saying it should be closer to 765,000 rupiah to reflect what it actually costs to live. So the gap between regular Indonesians and their representatives, it's even bigger than it looks. Okay, so if you can't dissolve the DPR, what can you do? Well, how about some basic transparency? Publish every rupiah they spend, every trip they take, every allowance they claim. Make it all public. Track their attendance. Create real consequences when they mess up. Make it easier for voters to recall representatives who have completely lost touch. Look, the anger driving these protests isn't crazy. These aren't the dumbest people in the world. They're citizens watching their democracy get hijacked by people who have forgotten what the job actually is. The job is public service, not getting rich off public money. Affan Kurniawan wasn't out there delivering food so politicians could live like kings. He was trying to make enough money to eat. The absolute least his representatives can do is remember that when they're voting themselves another pay raise, the protests will end eventually. The fires will get put out. The arrests will get processed. But the question that started all this, it's still there. Should the people's representatives live in luxury while the people they represent live in poverty? And maybe the bigger question, what happens to a democracy when the people running it become so disconnected from regular life that they can't even see why people are angry? I think the answer to that question is going to determine what happens to Indonesia. Because Affan Kurniawan isn't going to be the last young Indonesian to pay the price for that disconnect, unless something changes